In addition to being a frequent guest here at BK Live, Robert E. Cornegie Jr. is the New York City Council representative for the 36th District. Councilmember Cornegie serves as the chair of the Committee on Small Business, something he no doubt was groomed for as co-CEO of his own family, which includes 6 children. Yes. He takes their education very seriously, and when faced with the stark realization that his kids and those like them were at an educational disadvantage merely because of their zip code, he took action.
That disadvantage? Well, the nearly 8,000 students in District 16, encompassing parts of eastern Bedford-Stuyvesant and Northern Crown Heights, are completely without a gifted and talented program. So what's Mr. Cornegie doing? Well, he wants to get more kids to apply so these neighborhoods can get with the program, and what's more, the deadline is next Monday. And we'd also like to welcome back Councilmember Cornegie. Great to see you.
Thank you. You too, Brian.
As well as the author of a report on specialized high school admission, Lazar Treshan, the Director of Youth Policy and Community Service at the Community Service Society of New York. Welcome back.
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Councilmember, start us off. What is a gifted and talented program?
A gifted and talented program basically helps to accentuate students' abilities who have shown some propensity to do greater in particular arenas. So, you know, it's funny because they measure that at, you know, for 4 and 5-year-olds, which I guess would be a little difficult to do, but I guess primarily based on vocabulary and things like that, and a little bit of reasoning helps you understand where a young student like that is on that scale.
And so 4 and 5-year-olds would be taking a test to get into the program.
Yes.
Only at that time?
Well, that's what we're focusing on now. That's the entry point that we're primarily focusing on right now.
Okay. So, Lazar, we are focusing on those young people, but this isn't something that just begins and ends when you're a kindergarten person. It has ramifications that lead all the way up to high school and beyond.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting in the research that we did to come up with our proposal about the specialized high schools is that we find that when you get to the high school level, 85% of the kids who are testing into those specialized high schools actually are coming from those gifted and talented programs. Right. So if you think of the flip of that, most kids, if you do not get into a gifted and talented program, which is the majority, overwhelming majority of kids in the city, especially those in low-income neighborhoods, are already tracked out of the best high schools in the city, and that's as early as age 4.
And that sets you up before you even spend one day in the classroom. You get put on a track.
So I just got to say, I'm so glad to be here with Lazar because I couldn't have painted a better picture of what the end result is unless unless there's some intervention right now. I mean, I think him and I spoke in the back. I guess you should have filmed that, right? Us going back and forth about the correlation.
Not filming that?
About going back and forth just about the correlation between the lack of the presence of minority students in specialized high schools and the lack of gifted and talented programs. It seems like a duh to me, but to hear the report and some of those statistics can correlate directly to what we're saying, which is that we want to increase the number. Right. And just so you know, Bedford-Stuyvesant had gifted and talented programs. The Department of Education phased them out. My wife actually is a graduate of 308, which had a gifted and talented program, which was one of the more special programs in Bedford-Stuyvesant.
So we see that there's been, we had the numbers to say about those 8,000 roughly kids in District 16, and there's no programs, but they contrasted in an article you read that said District 20 in Bay Ridge and Bensonhurst has 9 programs. So it's roughly
actually 10. We called and it was actually 10.
It's actually
10. So the funny thing about that is, on the flip side, I have a son who has an IEP, right? So he has special needs. And because in District 16 they did not offer a one-to-one para to him unless he was a behavior problem, he had to go all the way to District 20 to school. So I would sit in PTA meetings with the very same parents. The reason that is very pertinent to bring up that district is because socioeconomically, it's very similar, right? So those are bus drivers, train operators, sanitation, working middle class. Yeah. The education levels, to some degree, are the same. The only difference is ethnicity. So if you look at the Upper West Side, obviously there's more glaring differences. Right. But if you make the comparison between those 2 districts in Brooklyn, there are more similarities than there are differences. The main one being ethnicity.
Okay, so if we don't have enough kids taking the test, we don't get a program. That's the way it is right now. Yes. Why aren't kids taking the test?
Because I believe that is because of access. So some parents that you ask why their children aren't taking the test, either they're unaware that the test is even available and that there's an opportunity for their child to be in a gifted and talented program. What other districts have done is they've created more of what they wanted. Right? So now they have a pipeline and they start the children earlier. They have test prep and all of these types of things that actually give students an advantage. I think that's incredible. I don't want that to stop. I just want the same opportunities and access
to happen here.
Right, and the other 3 districts who throughout New York City who've shown that they have no gifted and talented programs. Ironically enough, they're all in minority communities.
So Lazar, when we're looking at the citywide landscape, Mayor de Blasio sort of put his flag in education with universal pre-K. So do you see that as a disruptor?
I think that is the biggest thing he could do to solve this. That's a great first step. I mean, the reason, the council member, raised an eyebrow when we talked about, well, testing kids at all at age 4 is odd, right? I have young children, and being able to pick out those differences at age 4 is a real question mark.
Yeah.
It's one thing when we're talking about colleges, maybe even high schools, but differences at age 4 are really, the research says, a reflection of how many words you've heard by a certain age, and that is really to do with your parents' resources, to their time. Do they have job schedules that allow them to be doing that work with kids? Do they have other resources that are allowing them to support kids in those ways? So universal pre-K, I think, really is going to do that fundamental thing of increasing the number of words that young people hear, and that will really help. But I think there's a lot more to be done, and I do think we need to examine this idea, which the council member was right to raise, of are these institutions that we've set up, like Gifted and Talented, and we agree with all the recommendations of the councilman, created really to help kids, or are they created to create different tracks for kids early on? And that's something we need to look at even more closely.
Well, it seems like the difference between gifted and talented and sort of institutionalizing the privilege of having parents who are able to speak with you and read to you and have that time to invest in kids when they're at that age, when they're doing a weed out.
I mean, it's difficult, and so for me, I'd rather have that argument with programs available in the district than have that argument. So it's tough for me.
Right, then have that be the argument to not have the programs.
And I think that's been a way that we've separated our ability to access those programs, because I've had this discussion within my district about it, and some people say, wow, great, we'd love it, and then some people have other ideas about it, and I just keep saying, let's get it and shape it.
Let's try it.
Let's not look from the outside. And when we've had it, it's worked tremendously in the district. So I can point to, and I point to my wife because that's a very good example, but I also point to some very good friends that I know who went on to tech and other schools.
I'm one.
And actually went on to great colleges and who came back to the district and are now contributing from their experience and from their education. So that's really what you want. That's the pipeline you want. You don't want to separate kids. I know that feeling. So you don't want to take a kid out. But I was in a program called SP, right, which was in school in a regular setting where they recognized that a child may have some abilities, and they just they put them in a separate class with other students who they could accelerate the learning for those students.
Right.
They didn't remove them and take them somewhere else. We still had lunch together. I was still on the basketball team with these same people. So there's got to be a way, though, that we can do a model even that.
Right.
And it prevents the brain drain, too, without sending kids to schools where they can get that accelerated.
So Brian, one of the arguments that I've had as a council member, and more importantly as a parent, is when we take students out and place them other places, there's 2 main components to education. One is the reading, writing, and arithmetic. The other is the socialization. If you ask any parent, they're trying to get their children in a place where they can get a good, solid basis for reading, writing, and math, but they want socialization that brings out the best in the child. So the reality for me is that when I send my child to another district, and I'm experiencing this with my son now, he's socialized outside of his district. His friends are other friends. So the love and beauty and things that he feels in his own district, he may be disengaged from. And that concerns me.
Right.
So we want the whole child to be present to get the beauty in their own communities.
Right.
And I think everybody else should have that opportunity as well.
Yeah, we would agree 100%. We need to make sure that the young people in every community get the resources and support to get into gifted and talented programs. It's easy for somebody to say, well, every school should be gifted and talented, and that's not the reality of the world we live in right now. Yeah. So we need to make sure everybody has a pathway to that. But we also need to keep looking up the scale as kids get older and make sure they're on ramps. It should not be, okay, you got in or you didn't get in, and
it's
then
over now.
Exactly. This is basically the type of college you're going to get into 15 years later if you go to college.
Right.
So we need to examine, well, what happens from in elementary school, what happens from elementary to middle school, those transitions from middle school to high school. We've shown, there are about 570 middle schools in the city, and about 45 to 50% of them send 0 kids to specialized high schools. So that's the pathway that's happening, and those are from these gifted and talented programs.
We've got feeder schools and schools that are just not the ones.
Right.
So just to raise awareness, the 9th is the final
It's
day.
the last day to register
apply.
to take the test, which is offered in January.
We've got some stills just of the website so people can familiarize themselves with what it looks like and the process of getting in. But we know that you and some of your colleagues in government are working on a plan that would test all students.
Yes, I think we believe the evolution of this idea is for, in the future, for all children to be offered the opportunity at that early on-ramp to take the test. We believe that universal pre-K is an excellent opportunity for the test to be offered. And it should be offered to everyone. Parents should be able to opt out if they like, but it should be offered to every single student in the city of New York. I think that we'd see a better school system. I think that we'd see more resources. I think that that's just a better opportunity for everybody. So that's what we're pushing for as a council. I am an exec member of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus, and out of that caucus, we unanimously voted that we would like to see the Department of Education add to their robust entree of services in universal pre-K the opportunity to take the test.
To me, that's like a no-brainer, right? And on top of that, there's also the coaching that they would get and the exposure to language in pre-K that will help kids along in order to then take the test. What sort of pushback could there possibly be to this?
I would say no comment to that because
that means you have to tell us.
I don't know. No, I don't. There hasn't been any pushback. Actually, the Department of Education was just the Daily News editorial board brought it to my attention, and I immediately ran like wildfire, thinking this idea, like you said, was a no-brainer. And the Department of Education said that they would explore it.
So if on the day that the votes come up and it is a brainer for someone else and it doesn't pass, what recommendations have you guys put forward? We have a copy of your report that you did about the gifted and talented or about the specialized high schools.
Right. Well, and similarly, we think we're about opening those pathways all up the scales, all up the chain. So for high schools, we believe instead of using the current exam, which is not universal, kids are already taking exams every year. The 7th grade state math and ELA exams are what every young person takes for to determine every high school in the city. So we believe we should use those exams instead because you're losing a lot of really high-performing kids, mostly Black and Latino, who don't take the SHSAT, the Specialized High School Test. So we think we should use the state exams, which everyone takes, and in addition to rank order citywide, have the very top students, valedictorians and salutatorians, the top 3% of every middle school in the city also get automatic admission into the specialized high schools. That would be about 9% of the seats. So you'd still have 91% the same kids getting in, but allow the top achievers from every school, so you don't see these deserts where no one's going to the top high schools in every district, in every neighborhood. And these are the hardest working kids, right? Then you create incentives, have them be able to
But
get
if
in.
you're the hardest working kid at the worst school, the levels seem like they would be different. Is it that the idea that by raising expectations, the kids will rise to the level of expectation that they're going to be faced with at that high school?
It's a great question, and that is the greatest predictor of how you do. The next level of education, the greatest predictor of how you do is your class rank and GPA in your previous level. That's why the SAT is having so much trouble at the college level with so many schools dropping the SAT, because GPA and class rank are a much better predictor of how high school kids do in college. It would be the same with middle school and high school.
Right, and some people just aren't good test takers.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've heard actually about some colleges that have adopted that same sort of model. They'll take the highest ranking high schoolers automatically into their college, and I think that's doing really well.
Yeah, the University of Texas, right. The top 10, if you're in the top 10% of your high school in Texas, you get to go to a University of Texas school, and if you're in the top 7%, you get to go to the best school, which is Austin. And you see some great results there. People
Yeah.
are striving within the school. You have a real incentive.
get
You
up
also
there.
see higher income people moving into lower income communities because they think they have a better chance, which actually has a nice side effect of diversifying the school, which
Yeah.
makes everything better.
Everyone
All the
rises.
statistics point to the fact that if you put low-performing students with high-performing students, eventually they'll rise to the occasion.
Okay, last 10 seconds go to you. Tell us how people can get their students signed up for the test.
Well, like I said, we're on a tremendous push. I want to thank BK Live for allowing me to come in and really shine some light on this. You can go to the DOE website, which will give you the opportunity to go register for the test. And I just want to briefly say that I would like to thank the NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers, who's offered to give free test prep to students who have found themselves with the ability to take the test in January. So in November and January in minority communities throughout the city, there'll be free test prep as well. So you can go to my office and find when the schedule for those dates will be.
All right, thanks,
Excellent.
Nesby. That's
Thank
awesome.
you so much.
Thank you.